Hi, listeners. How are you?
Here goes, ladies and gentlemen. Here goes. Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Kristina Panos.
This is episode 310, Cyanotypes, Cyberdecks, and the Compass CNC. This week, tons of news, so I'll go through it real quick. First up, Hackaday Europe 2025 workshops just announced. That post went out on Wednesday, so head on over there. Two workshops are Matt Venn doing a tiny tape out and Mitch Altman doing a crazy freak out noisemaker with one of the SAOs we have in the kit, which I think is really sweet. If you're interested in either of those, head on over to the Eventbrite and buy yourself a ticket. And be sure to head on over to Hackaday on the Wednesday edition of Hackaday and read about the remaining speakers that we announced. So we've got the speaker lineup finally settled. We have actually one more, a keynote speaker that we're going to announce next week.
Ooh.
But everybody who's coming is the star of the show at Hackaday events. Like, it's mostly fun to be there with everybody. If you are at all able to make it to Berlin, head on down. We'll see you there. Hopefully we'll get some more news soon about the Friday evening pre-con meetup, but we don't have final details for that just yet. And next up in the news, KiCad 9 moves up in the Pro League, or at least that's our title for the official announcement of KiCad 9. If you follow the podcast, you remember 2 weeks ago, I think, when Jenny wrote up an article saying KiCad 9's about to be announced, and then they went through one more release candidate. And so we actually ran an article saying KiCad 9's official now before it was. But now it's officially official. So if you're a KiCad user, feel free to upgrade to KiCad 9, kick the tires, and let us know how it went for you in the show notes. I haven't done it yet, but next thing I do, I guess I will. And last up, Hackaday is hiring. If you've always wanted to be a Hackaday writer, and who wouldn't, then check out the post we ran on Tuesday where we are calling for writers. Hackaday's written by Hackaday readers. Hackaday's written by crazy hacking fools just like you. So if you want to contribute, we'll help you with the writing. We'll get you set up, get you paid for writing Hackaday articles.
Get you a desk in the dungeon.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
This week is a See Who Guessed the Sound Correctly week, and I've got a horrible spoiler. Nobody got it right. So first, Kristina, I'll give you your chance to beat all of our listeners who submitted an answer.
Well, that's clearly a face shaver. I don't know. Sounds like a face shaver to me.
Nice. So absolutely most popular answer by far was a tattoo gun.
Ooh.
Totally sounds like a tattoo gun. Tom said, "Are you shearing sheep?" Which is, I guess, the same thing as the electric shaver, just, for different animals. But like by far, everyone thought it was a tattoo machine, and you're all kind of right. It's something clapping along at like about 60 hertz. One of the hacks I covered was on magnetostriction, which was being used in this case as a distance sensor. Anyway, it's when you put a heavy magnetic field on a ferrous material, it contracts and expands. And this is what makes some transformers hum. And when the plates on a transformer get loose, they can kind of make this horrible, like, clappy, humming noise that you have heard here, and that absolutely nobody guessed correctly.
You heard it here first.
So this is a failing transformer, basically. It's a transformer where the laminated bits are coming undone, and it's going from just humming to humming and clapping.
That feels like something Al would have gotten.
You think so?
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is it sounds like so many other things. This one is impossible to get right because, like, there are so many other reasonable things that it sounds like. So I have extreme solidarity with you people who said a tattoo gun, because it really does. And a shaver. Most awesome wrong answers include Bristlebot scuttling wildly around a table. Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Oh, here's an electric razor. Oh, good.
Hooray.
Congratulations, Kristina and Always the Wrong Answer. You both guessed an electric razor or shaver. Oh, man. Sorry about that, but the name checks out. But it was a good wrong answer. All right, so that's it, folks. Nobody got it right. I think I blame me. I'm just going to roll a 30-sided die and we'll see who gets the t-shirt. Everybody who guessed wrong, this is your chance to get it right anyway. Internet will pick me a random number.
8.
How'd you pick the random number?
That's my favorite number.
Yeah, I can't take your favorite number. That's not random enough. It's a good number, though. Random.org, allow cookies, minimum 1, maximum 31, generate. Ooh, 13. Lucky
Ooh.
13. So, congratulations to Dakota, who had the wrong answer, an ablative laser cleaner / rust remover. Yep. I hear that too. It's just like a repetitive, high-frequency, slappy, clappy noise. Sorry. I'll get in touch with you and get you a Hackaday podcast t-shirt. Everyone else, listen next week. I'll pick something easier, I promise. I feel bad.
And you should. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I wanted to start off the hacks this week with kind of a rebuild of a project I've always loved, and that is handheld compass CNC lets Teensy do the driving. If you've seen the for sale project, The Shaper Origin, this is a lot like that, except it's a kind of cooler version, but also a completely DIY version. All the STL files to print it out yourself, all the code, all the hardware is very much within reach and all located in Cam Cheney's GitHub repository. So you can head on over there and make one of these yourself. What it is basically a sled for a router, and it has control of the Z direction and the X direction, and you push it around in the Y. It's got mouse sensors underneath, so it's got motion flow sensors, so it can tell how far you've moved it along, and it then guides the cutting head up and down and left and right as you push it forward and backward. And that lets you cut kind of with what looks like pretty good precision patterns that you've stored into it ahead of time. If you've seen the Shaper Origin run, this is a lot like that. So much so that I hope their patent lawyers don't come knocking on Cam Cheney's door, frankly, because this is very similar. The Shaper Origin works by controlling both X and Y axes, and so it can actually cut out little circles for you, which is a pretty cool feat that this one can't do. For this one, you'd have to push it forward and backward, and it would be able to do the left and right, like to make a circle. But the Shaper Origin also has a broader view camera on it, and you put down fiducial tape all over the thing you're cutting, and it uses that to navigate around, whereas this one is exactly like putting a mouse on the table. It's got mouse sensors in the base plate. It's exactly like a mouse. But it's really cool, and it looks like with a little bit of clever path planning on your part, you could make it have almost exactly the same functionality as a really big CNC router, except this thing is small. It's the size of, kind of a normal plunge router. Router? When I say plunge router, I really want to say, oh man, oh well, whatever. It's about the size of a normal plunge router, and you can kind of push it around. And I've always thought that was really cool. The Shaper Origin actually started off as a hacker project, and we covered it way back in its infancy. And then during the time, I think I found an article from 2016 when it was the beginnings of a product. It's now something you can buy, and I've actually tried one out. It's really fun to see it take your wobbly movements and turn them into smooth cuts. I think this could do the same. I've always thought that this idea is really clever because the thing that sucks about a really giant CNC router is that it's a really big machine and it has to take up this space all the time, where all the machine really gives you is kind of the small scale precision. And so I think it's awesome that you, the human, who's big and strong and mobile, can kind of push this thing around an arbitrarily big piece of wood and have it do the fine work for you. And so I love that. This looks like a really cool design. I mean, I think it's for light duty use. It uses, just a regular Dremel brand cutting head. I think you want to do this with small things, at least in this current incarnation. But it looks like a really super fun tool. And I just love the kind of man-machine cooperation that this kind of thing brings to the table.
I like the color. I think it
Right?
looks great, but I like the color too. I see they're a fan of that color based on all the pegboard stuff.
That's a secret trick to make your stuff look good. I learned this from an old artist friend of mine, Alberto Gaitan. Was like, he had this one accent color that he just always used. It was this red, right? And it was even to the point that his gallerist at one point was like, "This is Alberto Gaitan red," because he like put it in all of his things. But it just tied them all together. And he could do crazy, disparate things, but they all had like this common theme running through them in this one color.
Oh, that's cool.
It's smart. And if you pick a crazy cool color like this, run with it.
Yeah. Well, my first hack, I chose Gabe's Cyanotype prints on a resin 3D printer. Cyanotypes are just one of the many amazing types of prints out there. All you need to do to make a cyanotype is you need some sensitized paper, a negative of whatever image you want to print, and then a source of UV light. And most people use the paper and the sun. Gabe is using a resin printer as both the negative and the source of UV light. But the real goods here are in the software, because Gabe had to write some code that takes an image and turns it into something that the printer can understand. Gabe's proof of concept used Python to produce an OpenSCAD script that converts grayscale pictures into rectangular pixels, if you will, of varying heights. But now Gabe is using a new Python script that converts images using something called UV tools. Now, hardware-wise, it didn't take any retooling of the printer. Gabe just removed the resin vat and replaced it with a wooden lid that both holds the UV paper and protects the eyeballs at the same time. So you should be sure to check out the amazing prints that Gabe has been able to pull off so far in the gallery over on I.O. And I see you're adding an in-link. Potato. Ooh.
I think cyanotypes are super cool and they look really simple. And I've been wanting to buy some of the relevant chemicals to sensitize paper myself at home. And I think they're actually really simple. I mean, you can buy a kit for it and it's no big deal, but I think it's like potassium ferrocyanide and something else that you can.
Ferric, ammonium oxalate, and potassium ferrocyanide, and water.
It just looks so good. Anyway, if you want to see some more about various photographic methods, including but not limited to the cyanotype on a potato, I'll throw a link in the show notes for you.
I've been making gel prints.
Okay, tell me about it.
Well, you have this gel surface that's like Jello, sort of, or maybe ballistics gel.
Okay.
You put a thin layer of paint on it with a brayer, and then you can use laser prints from a laser printer if you do them half-toned images or text, or you can use magazine images if you have the right type of magazine images. And you put it down on the paint, lift it up, and then let it dry, put out a new layer of paint in a different color and paper, and then pull it, and it pulls off both layers of paint.
So the gel sticks to the paint and pulls it off?
Paint sticks to the gel and
Right.
dries, and you do whatever you want to the first layer, like, put leaves down or laser printed images or magazine images, because they work by magic.
I see. Okay.
And you press that down while it's wet and lift it up real fast, and you should have the reverse, but then you let that dry and roll out a thin layer of another color. You can use white if you want. Then you just put down paper and lift it like you're doing a block print, and it lifts up all the paint. You can do multiple layers, but you just got to let your paper sit longer and longer the more layers you have.
You're going to have to send us links to this.
Okay. Apparently Al grew up in a print shop, I found out.
What?
Yeah, I know, the things we learned about Al,
There's
right?
there's always something with Al. When I used to run a gas pipeline.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't always run a gas pipeline, but when I do, Al Williams, man of mystery. Next up for me, open source random numbers. Everybody has their things they like. With me, apparently, it's cyanotypes and random numbers. I have no explanation. I don't even need to explain my love for generating random numbers. Do I?
No. No.
Thank you. Thank you. You've saved everyone. Anyway, this is an awesome device made by Gabriel Guerrer. It's actually really kind of simple at its root. If you take a diode and you reverse bias it so that it's just breaking down, when the electrons do manage to tunnel across the PN junction barrier that you've got there, is kind of determined by quantum mechanics, and that's as random as anything gets. So you can take the current that's passing through there. It's very irregular, very jaggedy, and you can use the super noisy current to generate random numbers, and that's what he's doing here. The design of this random number generator is one that I've actually never seen before, and it's kind of clever. If you imagine the varying current going through here, you need to pick a threshold where you say above this it's a 1 and below this it's a 0. And you have to do that kind of carefully so that it's unbiased, so that on average there aren't more 1s than 0s, for instance. The way he's doing that here, which is particularly clever, is he makes 2 of these random number sources and he feeds them into a comparator, and 1 into the positive input, 1 into the negative input. So what he's actually doing is taking the difference of 2 almost identical random number generators and subtracting them from each other. And the idea is that that gets rid of the long-term bias. This then goes downstream into a microcontroller and out through USB, giving you tons and tons of random numbers in your computer, 136 kilobits per second of random data. He's run this through a bunch of the standard randomness checks, and it's got some additional checks it runs at boot up time to make sure everything's working. This is slightly more robust and, bulletproof than most of the totally random hobbyist random number generators we've seen. And all the schematics and Gerbers and all the design files are there for you. He's even broken out a bunch of test points so you can verify that things are working as they should along the way. All of this is aimed at not just making a random number generator, but making a random number generator that you can verify is doing the right thing. So if these random numbers really, really matter to you, and it's not just you're playing D&D or picking someone to give a t-shirt to, but say you're doing, real science where the quality and unbiasedness of the random numbers matter, this device is very reassuring in a whole bunch of ways. And if you're like me and you just like random numbers, it's a pretty cool way to generate them.
You know what I like? Instant photography.
Who doesn't?
I don't know. There are people, I assume. They're out there. My next hack comes from Toast, 3D print and instant camera. What is it about instant photography? Digital photography is, of course, instant in a way, but there's nothing quite like holding a picture in your hands right after it was taken, is there? No, there isn't, which is why the technology endures. And Toast has made an instant camera that uses Fuji Instax mini film. Now, this film requires pinching and rolling of the development chemicals to release them from their little sachet and distribute them evenly over the film. Making a good pinhole camera is non-trivial, and Toast figured out for this purpose a hole needed to be 0.26 millimeters. After trying and failing to print such a hole, Toast ended up using aluminum foil and, of all things, a pin to make a hole. What do you know? It's a... Wait.
Made with the what?
Yeah. Now, so this is in 2 parts. There's the actual pinhole camera, and then there's the roller mechanism. I have written that the actual camera is nothing much to squawk about, but that's not true, because it was non-trivial to make a pinhole camera. Come on. But the real magic is in the roller mechanism, which took a month and 9 redesigns to get right. So after trying all kinds of plastic roller mechanisms, from printed ones to even using just Posca markers, Toast took to the internet asking for help, and Christopher J suggested metal rollers, and Toast was off to the races. That's how he says it in the film. It's funny. I don't know if you watched this video, but it was funny.
It's pretty funny.
So be sure to watch the video to see the awesome shots that Toast has been able to get, because honestly, they're pretty awesome. Especially that first set that he showed when he's talking about the LED light source that he used. He just had these 3 that looked great. There's one of the Optimus Prime looking guy, and
right.
One of the still life, and then something else, and they just looked fantastic.
It sounds simple to just get the rollers done, but of course that is the hard part, is making sure that they both crush these little packets and then spread them evenly across the film. Otherwise you get blotches and you get horrible things and...
Rorschach tests. And...
yeah, right? Yeah, so I mean, it must have been a real engineering challenge when they were making the cameras in the first place and mass producing them, and now, of course, 3D printing them.
I need to use mine more. I need to get out more.
Where do you get instant film these days?
Oh, you can get it at Target. You can get
what?
Or Amazon, yeah, for the Fuji.
You
even
crazy
I think for the
hipsters.
new Polaroid too, because there's a new Polaroid.
Huh.
but it's, I guess, not as good as, I don't know. I ended up with the Fuji for reasons.
The instant camera has made a comeback. I missed it.
Well, you don't have a teenage daughter, so
I just got back into real photography with a legit digital camera. I finally embraced the future, and now everybody's gone back to the past.
I have a Diana F that I want to use, but I don't know where to get film for it.
What kind of film does it take?
120.
There's a certain kind of brute force to just putting a big negative behind the lens and taking the picture with that. Like, you can get fantastic resolution, as good as the lens you can put ahead of it. Oh, really cool. None of this expensive megapixels crap. My last hack this week, harvesting water with high voltage. I thought this one was a scam at first and was horrified to see it hit the pages of Hackaday. I was like, oh no. But then I saw that it comes from Jay at the Plasma channel. And then I saw that he's doing it based on a bunch of kind of real legitimate scientific research. And then I watched the video, and of course it's totally legit. It's really cool, actually. He's got two plates and is putting a 20,000 volt charge between the two of them. What this does is this takes any water that's in the air and kind of ionizes it a little bit, which then sucks it against the other plate and it condenses out. And then the water drips down and you can collect it. This isn't making water out of nothing. It's just collecting the water that's in the air. And the idea here is that, if you're in a place where there's fog in the morning and you want to collect this fog to use the water to irrigate crops or whatever, this would maybe be an effective solution for that. Like, if you're in a survival situation and you're really desperate, you can do something with a tarp to gather some of the dew. But this is like that on steroids. It's like that on 35 kilovolt. And it's a really cool technique. He demonstrates it in his little setup in a terrarium. He runs some wet air over it and this thing is just dripping. If your air isn't this saturated, or if you need to make this on a much larger scale, you can kind of start to understand why we don't have these in large scale in the real world yet. Like, you have to be in a place where there is some wet air to begin with. So, in the absolute desert, it's probably not going to work for you. You also have to have these really large plates with a lot of voltage on them. There are pictures of Jay putting his hand near it and collecting the water, but he's pretty careful not to zap himself with it because I think it would be unpleasant. That said, it's not drawing much energy because it just has to put these plates up to the voltage difference and keep them there. It is doing some work, of course. It's pushing water droplets around, but that doesn't take much juice to do it. It's just a really cool demo of an effect that at first I thought was going to be a scam, but then ends up being totally legit. He also mentions that there are dehumidifiers that are based on this principle, and he tests one of those out against his contraption, and it's just pathetic in comparison. And this is him hitting it with the same fog that he hits his machine with, but his machine just has so much more surface area than the little dehumidifier, which has got like a grid that's like 10 by 10 centimeters big, and it relies on a fan to push the air through there, and you're just hoping to get the water out in that amount of time. Whereas he's got this thing that's a big old piece of metal mesh that he's doing it with. I have no idea if this scales up. And of course, that's what people in the comments are talking about, because Jay actually suggests that maybe you could use this in a large scale application for like farming and stuff. And I think, the rest of the details are to be worked out, like how you do this and how you do it safely. But as a proof of concept, definitely concept proven.
My last hack comes from Nicholas Labonte, a precisely elegant Cyberdeck handheld. Man, we sure see a lot of good-looking Cyberdecks, but they just keep getting better, don't they?
Yup.
This one here sports a Raspberry Pi 5 and an RTL SDR, along with some cyberpunk and nautical aesthetics. The back and sides are made from hardwood, and there's even a beautiful bronze heatsink for the Pi. But more about that in a minute. Let's talk about the lovely front side. There's a red PSP joystick for mousing around, and a sweet little keyboard which features a custom PCB with tactile switches. And then on top of those switches, it's actually a polymer sheet with a faux aluminum veneer that Nicholas machined into a one-piece keyboard by tabbing each key into the panel. I particularly love the power button, which takes the place of the double stack of USB ports normally present on the Pi 5. Believe it or not, there's literally some room for improvement inside there, and Nicholas wants to add a camera or maybe a GPS receiver or possibly a 4G modem. He wants to address the sounds the keyboard makes and figure out a more effective heatsink because it gets a little warm. But the one that's on there is very pretty. The whole thing is just very pretty, don't you think?
I do. All right, I've got 5 quick hacks this week, so I'm going to go extra quick.
Okay.
Extra quick. The first one's kind of a public service announcement. This is Pi Pico gets a speed bump. The latest version of the SDK officially claims that you can overclock these things to 200 megahertz if you use at least 1.15 volts as the supply voltage.
Dang.
No secret, I run mine all at 250 megahertz, and you can't tell me not to.
I suppose not.
But now at least some of this overclocking is officially recognized. Next up, Michael Ilin, a web-based graphics editor for tiny screens. This is great. It solves that problem of how to get something that looks good on a tiny OLED screen. It outputs code that you can then cut and paste into your microcontroller application. He's got a for pay option that adds some extra features, but even with the free one, it'll be super helpful for you if you want to make cool looking graphics for your microcontroller project. Super simple hack, Goku X, to test a smart LED. It's basically got 4 pads, and you put one of those little WS2812 style LEDs on it, and it puts out the right signals to make it display red, green, and blue, so you can test out those little NeoPixel style LEDs if you think you've got a bad one, or if you just want to make sure they're all working before you solder them into a project. Import GPU. Python programming with CUDA is a cool library that makes use of the GPU-driven CUDA super parallel library for doing some serious number crunching. A bunch of people come in the comments and say, hey, what about OpenCL? Which is a C language based, but works on not just CUDA devices, but a whole bunch of GPUs. And I don't know the answer to this, so if you want to tell me about OpenCL, head over to the comments. Last but not least, Terrence Eden, Shout for smaller QR codes. Because there are 2 modes to encode data in QR codes. One is alphanumeric and the other is byte data, and byte data takes up more space. It turns out if you use all caps, it fits in the alphanumeric mode and can actually create smaller QR codes for the same amount of data. And Terrence found this out by typing in his very short web address and finding it was a lot of QR code, and then he did it all caps and it was smaller.
But what about small caps?
Nope.
No small caps. Okay.
It's like the 26 characters plus a few others. I think you're allowed like plus minus, and there's a small list. So I think it fits 32 characters into the alphanumeric. And so there you save. So that's 5 bits instead of 8.
My first quick hack comes from Morgan Manley. 3D print yourself a split flap display. Tired of split flap designs that are either too large or leave the electronics exposed for some reason, Morgan Manley decided to just build his own banana-sized display. Each module has 37 characters and moves quite quickly through the list, as you'll see in the video. Unfortunately, there's no build video as of yet, but the instructions are pretty great. This thing runs on an ESP32C3 Super Mini and uses 1 small stepper motor per character module. Next up is Abe's the perfect Pi Pico portable computer. Abe wanted something smaller than the Pi 4 or 5 builds we usually see, even as recently as earlier in this podcast. But Abe used an RP2040 Pico. Driving displays with a Pico is resource intensive, so Abe used a Pimeroni Pico Vision, which has 2 2040 chips on it. One of them drives an HDMI port, and the other is free to run software. The keyboard was a little more difficult, but Abe found an IR remote for smart TVs that has a QWERTY keyboard and was able to get that working with a bit of finesse and an adapter PCB with an I2C GPIO expander chip. This thing is running Slime OS, which is available on Abe's GitHub. Last up is Jantech Engineering's infill injection experiment makes stronger parts. Genentech Engineering believes that the next big innovations in consumer printing will come from software advancements and tricks just like this one, injecting molten plastic into voids and channels in your 3D prints in order to make them stronger. Now, Genentech quickly figured out that this will require a long, skinny nozzle and got an airbrush nozzle to do the job. The 4 millimeters of extra length can really reach into the cavities and fill them from the bottom up for better results. Now, Genentech demonstrates this with a 3D pen, holding it close to the table and then farther away from the table so you can see how it knots up and just, makes a mess when you have it too far away from the surface. But when you have it close, it makes a nice little mound. One of the lessons Genentech learned is that molten plastic is hot and can very well deform the print. Genentech put his filled prints to the test and found that infill injected parts were way more resistant to impact, but the stiffness was basically unchanged.
Well, that brings us to our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week, I picked Lewin's little bit of a rant. What game should replace Doom as the meme port of choice? And Lewin starts off with, I think, the hot take that's going to rile up a few of you out there. He's tired of seeing Doom ported to increasingly weirder and weirder devices. And I'm not. I love seeing Doom pointed to increasingly weirder and weirder devices. But I'm going to cover his point in good faith here. His point is that we've seen Doom, and Doom's been done to death, and Doom is a small game, and it's very easy to get onto our increasingly smart devices. Like when your toothbrush has more power than a 486DX used to, it's not as much of a magical feat of hacking bravado to get Doom running on it. And so his question is, what next then? And the first one he starts off with, and I think this is actually a very good candidate, is Quake. And he points out that Doom was a fake 3D game. It was a very convincingly fake 3D game, but it wasn't really rendered 3D. It's rendered 2D and expanded and contracted as it gets further away from you. Whereas Quake is actually like one of the first kind of 3D games, and you can look around it using the mouse, but yet it's simple enough that you could possibly run it on some pretty low-key hardware these days. It also has the advantage that the engine source code is open sourced since 1999. So porting it is not an impossibility. In fact, it sounds pretty good. You have to tackle the 3D engine part, but that, I think, is the hardest of it. Next up on his list is Half-Life or Counter-Strike. It's a much more sophisticated game than Quake, actually, and the engine that runs it hasn't been released openly, although there have been 2 open source clones. So I think you could take one of those and you could make a Half-Life alike game. Boy, speaking of hot takes, he says that if the full-blown Half-Life or Counter-Strike is too much data for you, you could just do like one level or one little part. And he says one playable level is enough. In Half-Life's case, maybe that could be the mind-numbing, unskippable intro that has you riding a tram for 20 minutes. Man, I love that about Half-Life. Immersion you got as you went slowly down into the Black Mesa complex on that tram. Different strokes, man, different strokes. That said, I wouldn't want to sit through it again, probably. And last up, he brings up Crysis. Crysis was, in the early 2000s, the game that brought everybody's really heavy-duty gaming rigs down to their knees. It's got graphics and shaders and a physics engine and all of that in a way that made it look pretty good at the time. The source code for the engine, for the Crysis engine, of course, hasn't been released either, so that's a tough one. There is, again, an open source engine called CryEngine. But look, you're looking at porting this to a computer that's meant to be a computer. I think at the end of the day, he agrees with me that Quake is probably the next game to push onto the next generation of small computers that we get in our everyday object. But Doom still has a place in my heart.
Well, you know what I think it should be.
Ooh, what's that?
Now keep in mind, I'm not a gamer, but I do have about 1,000 hours in this game.
Okay.
But I have no idea like how complicated it would be or what, but I love it. It recently went open source. Team Fortress 2.
Oh, right. Isn't Team Fortress on the...
2 is in the orange box with Portal and Half-Life orange box. I did play me some Portal 2 and some Portal 2 as well.
I started playing it last year, actually, because that was one of the chinks in my nerd armor that I decided I need to patch up. I needed to play through Portal. I'm stuck somewhere on level 19 at this point. Yeah, I think one of the things that made Doom the game to port to everything is A, that it's so simple, but B, that it's open source. And so if TF2 is just gotten open source, then hot diggity, game on. Again, it may be way too complicated. It's got lots of graphic rendering and stuff.
Yeah.
It might not be Crysis, but it's definitely more of a challenge than Quake.
Gauntlet lid.
Yeah, right?
I like to lay gauntlets down. It's kind of my thing.
As long as you got a lot of gauntlets. As long as your gauntlet collection is well stocked. All right.
Well, for my long form, I chose my own, of course, as I do. The one with all the green keyboards. And I don't mean recycled keyboards, unfortunately, but that's okay. I mean literally green keyboards. And the first one is inspired by the lovely red cedar tree, and it comes from a redditor named Western Red Cedar. You should really go check out the gallery on this right away as well, because the picture I chose doesn't do the overall design justice, but I was torn between showing the details and showing the whole thing. I kind of figured I should show the whole thing, especially to show off those PS2 buttons and Nintendo Switch joysticks. The PS2 buttons are for control and alt and stuff like that, and the joysticks are for mousing around and vertical horizontal scrolling. This thing runs on an RP2040 and has 50 beautifully hand-wired browns. Again, go check out the gallery on that one. Next up, I discovered recently the Rider Deck subreddit, and I am reminded of Unq Lee's microjournal, which Tom covered a while back, when it looked much different. Rev 7 went up on Tindy and sold out fast, but that's okay, because previous versions are already open source, and it's just a matter of time before this one is too. It's based on the ESP32S3 microcontroller and starts up right away, so you can get to typing quickly on the e-paper screen. And in case you didn't notice those typewriter-esque knobs, aren't those great? The left one wipes the screen and sleeps the machine, and the right one clears the screen in case of too much ghosting. The files go to a hidden SD card around back, or you can send them directly to Google Drive. Now, I really dig this centerfold this time, but I'm afraid I would get the whole thing dirty somehow. I don't know, it's just my style. I think it's the cloud wrist rest in particular, which I really like those, but I don't have any need for one because of the built-in areas on my Kinesis. And I may actually make good on my threat to show you all my battle station in its untidied form. It's not that bad, I promise, and I'm going to take down the post-it note that has my Google Voice number on it. Although it's my Google Voice number, so whatever, call it, I don't care. Next up is the 1895 Ford typewriter. No, Eugene A. Ford bore no relation to Henry Ford, but isn't this as lovely as those early automobiles were? Unfortunately, it was no fun to type on, because the keys were both springy and wobbly. Springy sounds kind of cool, but wobbly does not sound cool at all. But the cool thing about the Ford was it was a visible writer, meaning that you could actually see what you were typing as you typed it without doing something mechanical first, or getting up out of your chair to look over some piece of the typewriter. And it was the first to use aluminum, although there was a cast iron framed number as well that sold for $10 less. Now, the cool thing about Eugene Ford is that he worked for IBM for the rest of his life. He became chief development engineer of the New York laboratories in 1911, and he developed improvements to various punch card accounting machines and sorters and counters during his tenure.
That is the wildest, over-decorative metal on any typewriter I think I've ever seen. That thing is that's so beautiful, though.
Finally, a keyboard for cat lovers. I don't know if you noticed that I started using finally on the last thing. That's kind of a joke. It's supposed to mean, like, finally, like, this is the last thing in the keybind.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right. Boo.
So, if you have a keyboard and a cat, they've probably met cute at some point, and probably met time and time again to your dismay. So you could just give it up and go hog wild and get a cat-themed keyboard. which has not only cat-themed keycaps, it has a nice fluffy bezel, which you can change and clean, thankfully, and change to a different one if you want. But it's not just a cutesy little keyboard. This is actually a serious keyboard. It's got a sandblasted palm plate, a switch pad that is somehow specially tuned. I suppose they mean, like, contoured. It's got PET film for the sake of acoustics, and it's got 2 layers of sound dampening foam. And I imagine that the fluffy bezel does something to reduce the sound, I would think. But the switches are custom-made, quote, crystal pinks that were developed in-house, and they look pretty slick. But if you don't like those, it's hot swappable. And if you don't think all that's cool enough, the keycaps are dye sublimated for longevity.
Now, I looked at this and I thought it was a sacrificial cat keyboard. Which which is like, you hate the cat always on your keyboard, so you just get another keyboard to distract the cat with, and you just put it on the floor, and you're like, here, this is your keyboard.
Oh, not a sacrificial cat keyboard, a sacrificial cat keyboard. Okay.
Sorry, you don't have to sacrifice the cat. I should be clear. Right, yeah. So it's just like, it's a decoy, right? Like the cat's like, oh, I'm gonna go mess up their keyboard and, jump on it and type it and annoy them, but they don't know that it's not connected.
Like the controller you give to your little brother.
You could even tell the cat it's wireless. How would the cat know? Go
Perfect.
ahead, jump on it. It's Bluetooth. It's Bluetooth.
Oh boy.
Well, that wraps it up for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. The links you will find over at hackaday.com/podcast. And the cool projects you find, you will send us to tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
Keep on hacking.
yeah. Oh, no. No. Oh, no. Oh, my golly.
I'm blanking on the line from The Simpsons. Hey, it's your show.
It's our listeners' show. We're just recording it.
Back to the show. I have a game suggestion.
If we were recording this, that would have been the perfect segment.
So I'm gonna wing it here.
What do we got? Everybody knows we're goofballs anyway.
Yeah, we're recording it for posterity.